name is Darshana, and this is Ethically Yours, a podcast to simplify sustainability. Joining me on today's episode is Divya Ravichandran, the founder of Scrap, an enterprise that helps businesses and brands go zero waste. In today's episode, we are talking about the possibility of converting large-scale events and offices into zero waste spaces. I was first introduced to the concept of a zero waste lifestyle with Lauren Singer's famous TEDx talk, where she brought a small mason jar that had all the waste she had generated in 3 years. I was extremely intrigued and started looking up on how it was even possible to live a life like that. In no time, I found a thriving community in India practicing a similar lifestyle. I then bumped into Divya, who was a long lost friend from my early 20s, and she was practically generating the similar amount of waste as Lauren Singer was. I'm very excited for this conversation today, as this is going to be a practical toolkit for anyone aspiring to start living a zero waste lifestyle. Hi Divya, thank you so much for coming in today.
Hey Darshana, so happy to be part of this podcast.
So, Divya, you haven't really been working in the environmental or the waste management service space, so to say. I think you come from a very different background. So, how did you end up founding Scrap, and how did you start looking at waste differently? What was your journey? What was your story like?
Right, so my background is completely different from the work that I do today. I completed my MBA and worked with a big four financial consulting firm till about 2015. And my career path completely changed in 2016 with a massive fire that broke out in Mumbai's Deonar dumping ground. This was a 1 week long fire, which was really hard to get under control, and the city was shrouded in fumes. I remember, and at that point, my respiratory issues started to peak. So I had to lock myself indoors and started incessantly reading about what is a dumping ground and why on earth is it on fire. What I read, I couldn't still wrap my head around it. So how does an entire city's trash end up in these little spots called dumping grounds, right? So then I visited the dumping ground firsthand, saw the scale of trash of the city all in this one location, met with NGOs around there, met with local communities who lived right next to the dumping ground. And that's the day I decided that I had to check out of this system and I couldn't be a problem of this trash. I had to take more responsibility of my waste. So from there on, from that incident of the fire, I started making changes in my personal life, moved gradually to a zero waste lifestyle that year. And by the end of the year, I really wasn't throwing any trash out of my home. I started posting about that online, and a lot of people came to me and said, hey, what are you talking about, and how can I do this at my home? And a couple of friends reached out saying, hey, I have a small office. Do you think you could also do this at an office? So my answer was, why not? So we tried piloting a couple of projects at offices, and then it gradually snowballed into events. And then I realized that everybody wants to do the right thing and check out of the system of this massive consumerist and discarding system that we kind of generated, and would be happy to look for alternatives. They just don't know what the alternatives are, or how do you adopt and how do you get to that place of zero waste. And that's how Scrap was born.
Before we delve more into what Scrap does or how can one live a zero waste life, I'm sure a lot of listeners would also have the question that you had in the beginning, that how can a dumping ground actually catch fire?
Sure. So when we send mixed waste to the dumping ground, there's all kinds of different materials. It's your food scraps, it's your electronic waste, it's your plastics, metals, all mix together, right, in this toxic concoction that it creates in the dumping ground. Like food scraps, for example, when they start rotting, they produce a harmful greenhouse gas called methane, which is highly inflammable. That methane basically leads to these small sets of fire in the dumping ground. The 2016 fire wasn't in isolation. I spoke to a couple of NGOs that worked around there, and they said, "Which fire are you referring to?" Because there's lots. In fact, when waste scavengers would go into dumping grounds to pick up waste, they would say that when we're walking on all the trash, sometimes pockets of fire would break out right at our footsteps, right? And then we would just kind of like jump over it. So sending that mixed waste, especially from food scraps, is what causes to that methane buildup, which is very potent. The second theory around dumping ground fires is that we send such precious, valuable materials like metals to the dumping ground, and often to extract that from all the mixed waste. Waste workers or the mafias that operate out of the dumping grounds can set fire to small patches of trash so that everything else burns, and what you're left with is the metals become very easy to extract.
Wow, that is indeed a total mafia operation. I mean, I don't think a lot of us even understand what happens in the dumping ground, where there's very little that we've probably seen in movies or in YouTube videos. So before we actually get to understanding how large-scale events can go zero waste, how about we talk about how can each one of us do our bit and maybe even understand what sort of waste is typically generated from an urban household?
Right. So the first step towards taking more responsibility of our trash is to really understand what is the waste we are generating in the first place. That's how I started my journey as well, with a look into my trash can. Typically, households would generate a lot of biodegradable waste, which comes from your kitchens or your kitchen scraps and food scraps. Your vegetable peels, fruit peels, excess edible or spoilt food, eggshells, bones, etc. In India, about more than 50 to 60% of all our household waste is just biodegradable waste. Then we have the recyclable waste category, which is our papers, plastics, metals, glass, Tetra Paks, etc. And there's a third category, which is our reject waste, which is non-biodegradable and non-recyclable. Things like our sanitary waste, which is sanitary pads, baby diapers, etc. So these are the three broad categories that we typically generate. And then there's others like your e-waste, which we don't generate in such a large scale, but over a year you would accumulate enough to at least fill up a small container or a bin. So one of the first steps is, now that you understand what the waste is, the three waste categories, just separating the waste categories becomes a key step. Because once you mix all of these different categories together, that's mixed waste of garbage, and mixed waste is very hard to then fix. Right? So the first thing you can do is to set up three different bins in your house. One is for all your food scraps, and that's a really easy one. Most of our biodegradable or food scraps waste gets generated in our kitchen. So the first thing to do is just get a small container with a lid, and just label it as food waste or biodegradable waste, and all the kitchen scraps can go into that. What we need to make sure is that the recyclable waste that we're collecting, that it's clean. So for example, if you have a milk packet, just make sure like you give it a quick rinse, dry it, and then drop it into your bag, because then otherwise it's going to smell. And if it's smelling in your house, by the time it reaches the recycler's facility, it's going to smell, which makes it a lot more difficult to manage. So even for your food takeaway containers that all of us so often resort to, before you discard it, just make sure that you give it a rinse. There's no food particles on it, otherwise it's going to attract maggots, and that's what's going to smell.
Also, I think this little food particles which are left in the packaging that we even, separate and save, doesn't that cause contamination and then makes it more difficult to recycle? Isn't that one of the aspects why we're also recommended to sort of clean and dry and then segregate it?
Absolutely. So typically when it goes when the food container gets into the hands of a dry waste center or a waste scavenger, sometimes to extract the value, they'll sit and do the cleaning, right? Which makes the whole process tedious. So we're essentially adding another layer of removing the smells, removing the food particles, which means more time, more labor, more cleaning processes which goes into it, which overall reduces the economic value of it. And
Right.
the whole
Oh,
recycling industry falls on, like, it is built on the premises of economic viability. The more tedious, the more expensive we make it to recycle these materials, the less likely that that material will actually be recycled.
so, when we're talking about waste segregation, I think maybe some cities in India, Bangalore for sure, I think, is still segregating on a municipality level in terms of paper, plastic, metal, and so on, and even e-waste. And of course, more developed economies around the world. But especially in Bombay, what I've seen is, yes, the government is asking us to segregate dry and wet waste. A lot of times people are also confused what is dry and what is wet. Like you said, so, a lot of times I've seen milk packets, which is holding a liquid, is also considered as wet, and it's often mixed with, say, a food waste. So maybe, yes, it is more and more education information that is going out, which is helping people at least segregate dry and waste from their houses. But I've seen a lot of these, sanitation workers eventually just mix it all up in their garbage van, and then they just take it to the dumping ground. So is that even an efficient? So are we really doing, or is the municipal corporation even doing what they're saying? And I'm raising this because so at least people like us, we understand the importance of segregating, and maybe we give it to a recycler or we compost it at home and so on. But for somebody who's just about started segregating waste, and then they see that eventually it's all getting mixed up, I think their morale sort of goes down, and they're like, oh, I'm doing so much at home. I'm, sort of segregating, but it's all just going in together in their van. So do you think the municipality is actually processing that waste like it should, or is it just ending up in that dumping ground?
Right. So the infrastructure actually depends from one municipal ward to another. Often, I know in Mumbai, some wards are doing a much better job than the others. And this is something like the waste management systems is something we've just looked at building in a more concerted manner over the past couple of years. So I understand it's really frustrating when you segregate your waste, but then down the supply chain, if I may, it starts getting mixed either by your building housekeeping team, or by the local municipality, and you don't really know what's happening, and that can be a very discouraging sign. But I'd say maybe check with the local municipality, check with the garbage collector as to, hey, where does this really go and what do you do with it? Sometimes when you have the local municipality might actually have a dry waste collection center. I would urge everyone to go visit a dry waste collection center. Make friends with the local recyclers and dry waste collection centers. They'll tell you what materials are accepted and not accepted. But if you find that the waste is actually being mixed, it's good to start taking more control of your trash by yourself. So, for example, biodegradable waste doesn't really need to leave your home or even your building. So just setting up a simple composter at home, or getting everybody from your building in, set up a community composter for your apartment, can just cut down 60% of the trash that we're generating or throwing out from our homes, right? The second is to identify where the local dry waste collection centers are, and figure out if they can do a pickup from your building, or just go drop it at their premises. Mumbai has dozens of dry waste collection centers. Most of us aren't aware of that at this point. But there is that infrastructure that is available. It is slightly unstructured, broken, and informal right now, which makes it a lot more difficult to wholeheartedly participate in it. But it is being built. And I feel this becomes like a whole chicken and egg situation. For example, citizens are like, hey, you're anyway mixing my trash. This is a waste of my time. So I'm not going to segregate my waste. And the municipality officials are like, hey, I can't build dry waste collection centers and these composting facilities because citizens aren't participating in the whole system and segregating their trash. So I feel like it takes a little while to kind of set these processes up. Like you said, cities like Bangalore are well ahead of the curve because their municipalities, their citizen activists have been pushing for this agenda for well over 10 years now. Whereas we're doing a concerted push on it like right now. So I'd say like hold on to that hope, right? Like things are changing. I do see a lot more residential areas setting up composters within their own premises. I do see a lot more dry waste collection centers that have come up in the past even 2 years. So that infrastructure is being built.
In fact, in my previous residential society, I think there was a certain property tax rebate that the local government was also offering if the society has set up a composting for the entire building or even a rainwater harvesting or a solar power plant, something like that. So I think there is definitely some amount of support that's coming from the government. But I have to say from my personal experience as well, I started composting a couple of years ago. I tried a few types of composters, failed miserably. I had stinking garbage sitting in my balcony. And, I was so frustrated that I didn't even know where to trash it because it was disgusting. And then I remember reaching out to you so many times when I finally got myself that ceramic composter from Daily Dump. And, I pinged you at every step to see how much microbes to go in, if there are worms forming, if there are flies. But I think I successfully made it. And after a couple of months or so, I did manage to get an incredible compost that did not look anything like garbage, because that's something that people are also scared of, that, oh, it's coming out of garbage. Right. It's going to stink. It's going to look bad. But I think it smelled like the first rain in Bombay. So it was really fulfilling. Yes. And similarly, like you said, for the entire dry waste thing, it is tedious. Segregating paper, plastic, glass, and, educating your house help also to do the same in case you're not at home and you don't want any garbage to go out. So on a personal level, this is such a task. When we talk about the kind of events that you are managing and you are trying to make zero waste, of the likes of NS7 Weekend, the YouTube Fan Fest, there might be thousands of people coming in, thousands of vendors. It's a multi-stakeholder event. So how do you actually, go about doing this? I'm sure there must be a tedious process of planning, training, and I have no idea what all. So can you please take us through the entire process when you basically sign up with an event and say, okay, have the first levels of conversations? What's your general SOP for that?
Sure. And before that, if I may just add, the reason most of us find it so challenging to, start simple steps like waste segregation, composting, recycling is just because we've had a lack of understanding around what this really means all our lives. I remember when I had to start composting, I was very daunted by the idea that there's going to be food scraps decomposing in my house. Versus now I've been doing it for 4 years, so I understand it's such an easy process. And a lot of this is related to behavior change. Like you said, getting your family on board, getting your house helps on board, guests on board. That's the tricky part initially, but trust me, in a couple of months you get the hang of it. You understand what kind of messaging that needs to be sent out. You understand what kind of processes to be set up. But it's not something that schools have taught us. So when we have to take the initiative ourselves, suddenly it seems very daunting and challenging. But it's a very meaningful and turns out to be a quite an easy and fulfilling process at the end.
It's definitely fulfilling. I have to say that. Definitely daunting in the beginning. And I remember my mom used to also segregate her waste, but she did not have that entire loop figured out of, the dry waste pickup centers or drop centers. But I had managed to, involve my entire society in this entire dry waste pickup bit.
Awesome.
So I used to actually meet her every Saturday or Sunday and pick up her dry waste and get it home and then give it to this organization who used to pick it from my place. And actually, so now recently we've moved to a new house and I haven't really been able to set up this entire system yet. So somewhere I do feel extremely guilty that, oh, my composting is not back on track yet, or, my waste is not going where it should. So I think it does become a part of your lifestyle. Like you said, it's a behavior. And I think I'm getting withdrawal symptoms right now.
Yeah. And that's the most important part. It's not that in the short term, because of a change like shifting homes, you've not been able to do it. But the fact that it's become an integral part of your life and your behavior, and it's something that you care about, now that's a success, because that's long-term behavior change, which is not going to leave you for the rest of your lives. Also, if I may add, we've been getting a lot of questions from people asking, hey, I've been collecting my recyclable waste. What do I do with it? And we want to make it easier for people to access this information. So as I speak, my team's actually putting together an easily accessible map for Mumbai, where we're plotting out the various dry waste location centers, so that you and I can then stop picking up dry waste from our parents, and they can be more independent with the drop-offs.
That would be amazing. I think a lot of people are clueless, and that would really help. So I will look out for this map. And for all our listeners who are wanting to get onto this lifestyle, I think Divya is going to give us a handy tool to help out with that. Divya, do you want to maybe now highlight on the events bit and how do you actually go about executing this?
Sure. So, events for me personally is a very interesting space to work in terms of bringing about sustainability and waste management, because it's a space where thousands of people gather for a very short period of time to listen to their favorite artists, and that platform is uniquely poised to bring about change, right? To hear your favorite music festivals, your sporting events, or corporate leaders at company events tell you about their personal commitment to sustainability and the simple changes that they're taking. For example, a music festival, an artist saying, "Hey, I'm ditching the disposable plastic bottle. Check out my reusable bottle because I don't want to contribute to that problem." Right? That has a massive ripple effect on everybody who's a fan and is attending that event. So that's just some background as to why we really got into the event space, because in terms of building awareness, that's very attractive for us. When I started off with doing pilots in 2016, nobody understood what we were trying to do. And they were like, "You want to manage our trash and do what?" And then I quickly realized that most event organizers didn't even know they had a problem with trash. Because you see, all of the focus so far had always been on housekeeping services and keeping the venue litter free. But what happened to that trash when it got picked up from the venue? Where was it taken? Where was it disposed of? That's not something folks had actually paid attention to or looked into. And we wanted to help change that. So the initial couple of pilots for us went in just setting up the infrastructure, making sure the waste is segregated on site, sent for recycling, composting. And we want to then provide data-driven recommendations to the clients so that they understand, oh, I didn't know my 3-day event generated 15,000 kilos of waste, which was previously just getting dumped into a landfill or a dumping ground. So that's the change that we've seen over the past 3 years, where event organizers have now become a lot more cognizant of the problems of waste, and the fact that they need to adopt sustainable solutions. So, taking forward that point about building awareness and behavior change, the one that we discussed in our personal lives, it's important to extend that now to larger platforms like events. So we split our implementation into 3 broad phases. One is in terms of the pre-event implementation, where we we actually sit down with event organizers maybe 2 to 3 months in advance to understand what kind of materials are they actually using at the event. Identify which ones of those are biodegradable, recyclable, and which ones are non-recyclable materials, and suggest alternatives, more sustainable alternatives for them at that spot. And that 2 months period allows us to introduce those alternatives and vendors who can provide those. For example, one of our key focus areas is how do we reduce disposable plastics, especially from your food and beverage areas. So all the food courts that we work with, we ensure that those are transformed into disposable plastic free zones, which means all food is now either being served in reusable servingwares or compostable servingwares. And this is also in compliance with the government rules in states like Maharashtra and Karnataka. And at this point, we also craft the sustainability goals for event organizers for that particular event. What is it that they can commit to? And put out messaging on that. So that's a commitment from the event. And that's not just greenwashing or lip service saying that, hey, we're doing all of this. They're actually putting that out, and that gives them that motivation to kind of stick to that and go all in with that. We then comes the second phase, which is the implementation phase. And essentially, here's where we make sure that we understand what the venue layout is. Where are the strategic locations to set up the dustbins? That sounds like a really silly, item to even think about, but it's so important because if you don't have dustbins easily accessible, people are going to start littering, right? So the anti-littering and getting people to move to dustbins is one of an important focus at this point. And then we remove all single bins from the venue and replace this with a 2-bin system, which is for food waste and recyclable waste. We don't call it dry waste and wet waste because, like you said, a lot of people are so confused about these terms. We've seen people bring plastic cups in which they just drank water and they think that's wet waste because it is wet. So from our side, it's really important to make it intuitive, easy to understand, and accessible. So we'll have very clear signages over every single dustbins, and everything's color-coded in green and blue. And we put clear signages as to what goes where. And our signages at our eye level so that it's easy to kind of not miss for the attendees. We also have a massive team of volunteers who join us on ground, and that's our trash talk team. And what they do is, they're spread across the venue, especially at areas like the food court where there's a lot of waste generation. And now they're building awareness on the whole waste segregation component of it. A lot of people realize when they see the waste segregation bins, it's something that they may be familiar with, but they might not participate. Again, because they're not fully convinced that you're actually doing something at the back end. A lot of people come with a mindset, oh yeah, I've seen two, like a green and a blue bin that's in some railway station or on the streets, but I know that that's mixed waste, so I'm not going to waste my time participating in this. I don't think this is any different than those two random bins placed. So having our volunteers there, having those communications on ground is really important for people to take this seriously. There is somebody actively looking into it. And this is not just greenwashing or lip service that's being paid to it. And we get all kinds of questions from attendees, which is super interesting. They'll be like, hey, why are you asking me to put this plate into food waste or biodegradable waste? What are you going to do with this? And when we tell people about like the idea of what is biodegradable, how we compost it, it just blows their mind to learn that their plates are made from sugarcane or from areca leaves. And that prompts them to go back and kind of learn more about what are these alternatives and why events are adopting them. A lot of people also then come back to us saying, hey, at the end of the event saying, if you could do this at an event this scale, I can certainly do it at my home as well. And a lot of people write back to us saying, hey, I've started composting and segregating my waste at home now. Now, what happens is once the bins are full, these are carried by the housekeeping team to the back end. And we do something called a decentralized waste management process, which means we don't want to just bag up the trash and send it to a disposal facility saying this is your headache now. Because we're a social enterprise, we work with NGOs that work with or represent waste workers' rights. And we often tap into them to hire waste workers. Like in Mumbai, we work with an NGO called Stree Mukti Sangathan. And their team is then present at the back end. We've got something called a waste sorting area at the back end, where all the trash is then, all the segregated waste is brought at the back. And they will check that, our waste sorting team will then check that every single piece of trash is checked for the segregation. And then they'll further sort it into various different categories, which is paper, plastics, metal, glass. There's all your plates and cutleries, your food scraps, Tetra packs. All of that is divided into sometimes 20 to 25 different categories that's bagged up and kept aside. And that brings us to the third stage, which is the post-event stage, where now that the event is over, every bag of trash that is now collected, whether it's biodegradable, recyclable, reusable, or reject waste, all of that is weighed by the different categories and then sent to the right disposal locations. So, of course, we've identified dry waste collection centers, recycling facilities, composting sites, biogas plants, and for any materials that have further use, like if it's cloth banners or flex banners, we want to make sure that these aren't trashed, and we find it a home in NGOs that have further use for it. For example, the banners are often, we send it to an NGO called Gunj, where they use it in their relief and rehabilitation projects. We also, we invite upcycling artists to come pick up any materials that they may find of value. So what we're left with is 10% or less, which is actually non-recyclable waste, which is non-biodegradable or non-recyclable. So if an event previously needed 10 garbage trucks, after waste management, they need like less than half or one garbage truck of pickup. That's about it.
That's quite an incredible number, actually. I assume that you might have at least 30% left after all the processes, but I think 10% is really incredible.
Yes, that's correct. And in some events, in fact, like our end goal is to not have any waste sent to the landfills at all. Right? With some events, we've also had about 99% waste diversion from the landfills. And in my home, for example, just drawing an example of that, I discard waste from my home just once a year, and it's usually less than 100 grams. So a lot of the non-recyclable waste can then be further inspected and seen, hey, what really went as reject waste, and how can we avoid it for the next edition of the event? And that's where like we then share a waste audit report with the event organizers, where we outline how much waste was generated, what type of waste was generated, how much was paper, how much was plastic, metals. We've got all that data in it. Where were these various materials sent to? Like, what were the disposal processes for this? How much trash were we left with, and what are some recommendations for the future? So it can't be like with every edition we have to look at how we can better it, how we can reduce the amount of trash A that we're generating, and then B that we're managing and discarding. That becomes really important.
That's true. Actually, I'm quite surprised when you mentioned the interaction and the involvement that the people would be present at these events would have. Because I mean, I've seen your communication; it's brilliant, it's extremely engaging. But I somehow assume that because an event is like an annual thing, or like once in 6 months, maybe that sort of an involvement might be missing from individuals who come and attend the event. And that is something that I wanted to touch upon, on the fact that now that you're also consulting offices to manage their waste better, I think that would be a more immersive experience, because that's happening day in, day out. I think that would really be a lifestyle change for people working in that office. So can you maybe, how are your the approach is different when you are working with an event that probably happens annually vis-a-vis an office space where these things have to be looked at on an everyday basis.
Right. So, as you rightly said, right, with events, our goal is to build awareness and then bring about small short-term behavior change as well. With offices, now our projects are rather long-term. They're anywhere between 5 months to about 11, 12 months, depending on how big the office really is. And the reason our office projects are so long is to be able to allow adequate time to bring about behavior change. Right? We don't want to go into an office space and say, "Hey, we're changing your bins, we're changing all your cutleries, your cafeteria items, we're taking away your tissue papers," because that's going to cause a revolt and a lot of distress for people. So our approach with offices is entirely focused on how do we bring about gradual but sustainable and long-term behavior change. So with our offices, what we do is we again, like, the waste audits are a very important part. Every office can be so different in terms of how they're really, like, what kind of resources they're consuming, what is their trash makeup. So really, to understand that and build customized solutions for the offices becomes important. Um, Once we understand that through our waste audits, then we focus on a whole host of trainings. These are designed to build awareness around the garbage crisis, because we realize most people are simply not aware about it. And you can't act on something that you aren't aware about or don't care about. So we do something called trash talks with the employees. We have sensitization sessions with the housekeeping team of the offices, because they are one of our biggest stakeholders in the entire process. So it's important to change that perception about, oh, we're not dealing with kachra, we're dealing with zero waste, right? Which is a larger objective. And then we build these green teams within the office, where we have these champions from various teams who join us, who get sensitized on us, and then they become the internal champions of helping us drive those initiatives in the office. Once that's done, we then focus on the infrastructure. So we've now, from the waste audits, identified how people are discarding their waste, what is it that we want to change it to, and how we bring about that change. So, for example, a simple first step to do is to remove all the single dustbins that are scattered around the office and to create waste segregation points across the office. Again, this would be a 3-bin system. So there's food waste, there's recyclable waste, and reject waste. And then we have clear signages for every single bin. And these signages are now customized based on the kind of trash that particular office typically generates. A lot of people still find it challenging. So from the trash talks, we built that awareness. But the next part really is on translating that awareness into action. So for the first 10 days after we've set up the bins and the new waste segregation infrastructure, our team is actually stationed at the office around those points so that people can come up to us if they have any questions. And then there's a lot of discussion within teams about, like, hey, where does that one material really go, right? And our team is there to kind of guide them through the process. So now the new normal and the social norm in the office within 2-3 months is to segregate your waste. So our entire office project is designed to bring that behavior change. And once our waste segregation is proceeding well, and we also have a fun zero waste goal board that we set up in offices saying, hey, here's where we want to go. We want to move towards zero waste, which is divert 90% of all our trash away from the dumping grounds. And here's where we are. We're at 0% right now, right? So over the months, you can actually see their progress, which is really exciting to get people to kind of participate and put their whole weight behind. Hey, let's get to that 90%. Once the waste segregation is looking good, we then start focusing on other aspects like, hey, we can now start recycling the waste because 95 or 99% of all the recyclable waste is clean and it's separate from food scraps and other contaminants. And then we call in like the recyclers or dry waste collection centers and figure out the logistics for how this material can then be sent to them on a regular basis. We then start looking at the food waste bins. And then if that is looking without contamination and if the food waste bins are well segregated, we set up a composter and preferably within the office premises itself so that people are able to see, hey, my trash, my biodegradable waste is being composted right on site. And that's an icky idea for a lot of people who think, I cannot believe we're rotting food waste in our office. But once we start composting, you'll see a lot of curious people hovering around the composter saying, hey, why doesn't this smell? So that's an interesting process to help build that relationship with waste. And then we do fun things like when the first compost is ready, we do like a harvest celebration, like a first harvest celebration. So everyone knows that, hey, we just had our first compost at the office ready. And then we'll pack it and we'll give it in some of the old reusable containers and we'll give it back to the office employees. Like, hey, here's your biodegradable waste converted into this, right? Take it home and feed it to your plants in your home or in your neighborhood. And it just sparks so much joy in people to see how compost is really made and what like something which is really ugh and icky has been transformed into something so beautiful. And from there on, we start doing a lot of sustainability workshops as well, so that behavior change is led. It's not restricted just to the office, right? It's something that has to also extend to individuals' homes. So now we start doing workshops around how do you segregate waste at home? How do you compost at home? Where do you drop off your recyclable waste? And from there on, we start looking at waste reduction measures as well. Like, hey, we're generating X kilos of recyclable waste, but a lot of it is just avoidable. Like, how could we cut down on our paper consumption? How could we reduce the disposable materials used in the cafeterias? How could we make the pantry areas more eco-friendly? So simple steps like eliminating all plastic cutleries, paper cups, putting messaging around printing stations, and we've seen at some offices we've saved about 10,000 paper cups from being used every single month. So that's what our zero waste offices are designed around, which is building awareness, behavior change, making sure the effective infrastructure is set up at the premises, getting everybody involved together, making sure the processes are functioning well. And at the end, more than 90% of everything that was being generated has either been reduced or diverted from the landfills.
Wow, Divya, this sounds like a massive operations. I mean, it sounds as if you're literally parenting individuals to, unlearn everything that they have lived by, and just adopt new ways of living. So I think it's an incredible initiative. Firstly, so congratulations, to actually get involved at that level with individuals and their workplace, and even in their lives. It's really incredible.
And you should actually join hands with the BMC or the government at large, because we need more positive communication towards this. I don't think this communication around, the world is getting doomed and there is just too much waste around us. I don't think this aspect is sort of working and going down very well with humans. Anyway, I think growing up, all of us have had a very poor relationship with waste. We've always looked at janitors or sanitation workers or housekeeping staff and always assumed that it is their job. Even to take garbage out of our houses, there are a lot of apprehensions. So this sort of a conditioning, it just seems so positive to me. And I can only imagine the sort of atmosphere in offices, because given that work is already stressful, you have meetings. This is such an amazing thing, which is led by a community spirit where people can come together and do something which is not related to work at all. So, you need to just connect yourself to a school and catch guys in their early days. I think once we have this sort of a culture imbibed in the youth, I think the job will be half done.
Absolutely, and that's something that's in the pipeline currently. What better exciting way to build awareness than with children? Because I think they intuitively understand this a lot better, and for them it's learning, whereas for adults it's unlearning a lot of things that we've been taught, right? Like for us, it's always been, hey, don't litter, and you're a good socially responsible citizen. But now the conversation has to change to, hey, you have to segregate your waste, and that's being more socially responsible.
That's
But something
true.
you
Yeah.
said, like, really, like, I'd like to harp on that a bit, about how this doom and gloom tone around the environment isn't going to work. It's not going to inspire change in any way. Like with our projects, what we've always tried to do is to make the whole conversation around waste as fun, cool, sexy, and the right thing to do. Especially at events and offices, that's worked really well for us, and a lot of effort goes into the way in which we craft our communications to make sure that this is the vibe that we're giving out. And just to add, like, I totally get what you say when our perspective around waste has always been around waste pickers and, oh, like, ganda kaam hai. So when I started in 2016 2017, I remember events, the venue, the folks working around there would ask our team, our waste workers team, saying, "Madam तो बहुत पढ़ी लिखी लगती है, like ये काम क्यों कर रही है?" Like they'd
I was
be
just going to
baffled
ask
about
you,
it.
like, what was your parents' reaction? You were into finance, you were into MBA, and now, like, हमने पढ़ा लिखा कर बेटी को इतना बड़ा किया और अभी वो कचरा उठा रही है. Did you get something like that from friends, family, or something like that?
Oh yeah, everyone thought I'd lost it. Like my parents, I think, just gave up hope. They were like the education was just of no use. I can't believe you left such a lucrative corporate job to what? To work with trash. Like that's just ridiculous. I don't think they could wrap their head around it. They do get it now.
They must be
Because
very
my
proud
parents,
now, though.
I don't know about that, but they've definitely moved towards a zero waste lifestyle. So I'm really proud of them, though.
Brilliant, brilliant. So, Divya, if individuals want to connect with you, if they want to maybe, bring about change individually in their lives, or maybe organize some sort of workshops or training sessions amongst their friends, peers, housing societies, is there a way you can help them?
Yes, so we do have a lot of workshops on various sustainability topics, and we share updates about this on our Instagram and our Facebook page. So please do reach out to us. We'd love to see if we can customize workshops for individuals.
That sounds brilliant. Before we wrap this up, what would be some very simple and easy tips and tricks for somebody who's just starting out in this world of garbage? What is it that you would like to recommend or just, highlight?
At a personal level, I would say one of the most impactful things we can do is to start segregating our trash, start composting our food scraps. It's a big climate action step that all of us can and take, and it's so easy and it's beautiful. And recycling our trash. And once you start with this, I feel like a lot of people then build on that journey and of their zero waste and sustainable living, and start identifying for themselves, hey, what works for me? What trash could I reduce? Or how could I reduce wastage in my life? What are some other sustainable living steps that I could take? And for each individual, that journey is really different.
Yeah, I think it's a great starting point for anybody who's even starting off on this journey. That's very, very important. Well, one of my favorite questions towards the end of every episode that I like to know about our guests is if you were to get a t-shirt printed for yourself with a quote on it, what would that quote be?
I mean, that T-shirt has to be secondhand or something from my wardrobe, and then that quote could be "Make less trash."
That's nice. Simple, sweet, to the point. Your communication game, Divya, as always, is spot on. Well, lastly, before we wrap up, would you like to give away your details in terms of where people can find you, your website, social handles, emails, etc.?
Absolutely. We're on Instagram and Facebook. Our handles scrap.zero waste. That is SKRAP.zero waste. Our website is www.scrap.in. That's SKRAP.in. And if anybody would like to drop a note, my email address is divya@scrap.in.
That is lovely. Thank you so much for trash talking with me, Divya. This was an absolute pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Congratulations for making it to the end of this episode. I hope you had fun listening to this. We have a lot more interesting conversations with different stakeholders across sustainability. If you think that you have learned something from this podcast, be sure to recommend it to friends and family. Also, do follow our podcast. We are available on multiple platforms, including Apple, Google, Spotify, and a lot more. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. See you soon.